This is BBC One. Now see here.
December is the time of year that many people look forward to. But for deaf and disabled people, there is more than just Christmas to get excited about. On the 2nd of December, the anti-discrimination legislation comes into force. DDA, the Disability Discrimination Act, should mean an end to discrimination against disabled people. But what will DDA mean for us? See Here has been investigating the different areas covered by the Act. Our first investigation is in the field of employment.
The basic rule under the DDA is that an employer in the United Kingdom must not discriminate against a disabled person.
Behind me, the Disability Discrimination Act is being explained to the Doncaster Deaf Action Group by solicitor Douglas Silas. He specialises in disability issues. Discrimination is a big problem for deaf people, especially in the workplace. So I'm here today to find out how DDA can help.
What is discrimination? Discrimination is where a person or an employer treats a disabled person less favourably for a reason relating to that person's disability.
My view professionally is that the DDA is good because it's a new law that should stop discrimination against disabled people. And it's about time. But the law itself, it's not a full law. It doesn't cover everything. It's quite patchy. I'll give you an example. If an employer has maybe less than 20 employees working there, they're not covered by the Act. That's point one. Number two is if they say that we'd like to make adjustments to help the disabled person, but it would cost us too much money and we wouldn't be able to afford it, perhaps a business would go bust, then maybe it would be hard to prove discrimination.
If people have a problem with racial or sexual discrimination, they can go to the respective commissions for help. But where can deaf people go?
With the DDA, there has been a new council set up, just like the ones for race and for sex. But this one hasn't got any powers of investigations itself to enforce the Act. This could be a problem, because if a person who is disabled feels that they have been discriminated against, then it will be up to them to make their own claim. There won't be any assistance available to them.
Legally speaking, do you think that the DDA is a poor act?
The DDA was rushed through Parliament, but it was said that there would also be codes of practice and regulations prepared which would help to get it through. But it wasn't thought out and was too quick. They were trying to make the Act good, but it doesn't matter how many codes of practice or regulations there are, you can't make this Act that good because they just haven't thought of everything.
Cases will usually take between 6 to 12 months to come to the industrial tribunal, so lots of disabled people are going to get put off because the amount of time it's going to take. But they will be able to bring claims provided they can prove that they've been discriminated against. Has anybody got any questions they directly want to ask?
We went in for the interview. I was a skilled typist. I had 10 years' experience. During the interview, the woman said to me, "I think you'd better start at the bottom." The social worker hit the roof. What? The bottom of the pay scale? Come on, we're going. When we got outside, I asked what was wrong, and the social worker said, "I'm not having you start at the bottom again. Isn't that terrible? From BOC. Isn't that discrimination? She said it because I'm deaf.
They discriminated against you because you were deaf. From what you say, you had good skills. So the only reason they discriminated against you was because you were deaf. Now you'd have the right to bring a claim. Well, at least after the 2nd of December, 1996, you'll be able to bring a claim.
So what's the first step then? Do I go to a solicitor or a social worker? Where? What's the first step?
What you can do is you can either see a solicitor or go to your trade union if you have one, or go to the Citizens Advice Bureau. But whatever it is, you've got to go in to make a claim within 3 months. And the best of luck.
Almost all of those deaf people at Doncaster have experienced discrimination, either in the workplace or else looking for work. So is this a problem that is widespread throughout the country? I'm going to see the Chief Executive of the BDA.
It is a big problem. Most deaf people in their everyday lives encounter some sort of discrimination. Most of these incidences occur as a result of people's attitudes or perceptions of deafness. People are generally ignorant. It's just a question of raising their awareness so that they can understand more about what deafness actually means. That would help to reduce discrimination, but at the moment it is a serious problem.
Will the legislation open the floodgates for deaf people to take their claims to court?
I would expect that we're going to be inundated by calls from deaf people who will want to know what the legislation is going to mean for them and how they can actually take some action. So I'm expecting a lot of that. One area of weakness, though, is if you want to make a claim for discrimination under the present legislation, deaf people would have to pay for that out of their own pockets. There's no legal aid, it's not available for this. So I wonder how many deaf people can afford to do that. One possibility, though, for us is to work in conjunction with perhaps the law centre and bring a test case. Then if that's successful, then we'll have established a precedent for future claims.
If deaf people suffer discrimination at work, how can the BDA actually help?
Well, one thing that we're delighted about is a recent successful application to the Lottery Charities Board, which will fund a 3-year project. We've called the project Deaf Dial, which is Deaf Discrimination Information Advice Line, or DIAL for short. It means we can set up a mini-com line where deaf people can get advice if they feel that they've been discriminated against. It could be either general discrimination or something that's happened in their employment. So having looked at the Disability Discrimination Act, they can then call us.
Whatever your opinion, the Disability Discrimination Act is the first step towards bringing disabled people on a par with those who suffer discrimination because of race or gender. 7 out of 10 disabled people are unemployed, but we don't yet know whether this legislation will prevent discrimination against disabled people in employment, including deaf people. If you would like more information or advice about the Disability Discrimination Act, there is a special feature in this month's See Here magazine. At the end of the programme, we will give you the address of the magazine and the BDA Deaf Dial helpline number. And remember, See Here will be investigating other areas of this legislation and how it will affect the lives of the many deaf people in the future.
After 60 years of watching the box, we were the first in our...
There's nothing on the telly these days. I quite fancy going to the cinema and checking out the latest movie. It's also a great excuse to stuff myself silly with hot dogs and popcorn. But the trouble is, the volume of the background music and the sound effects in films these days is simply deafening. It's so loud you can't actually hear what the characters on the screen are saying. So what's the point in going at all? Well, there is a way around this problem. If my local film guide tells me which cinema has a facility for the hearing impaired movie buff, it's called an audio loop system, and it works by transmitting the film soundtrack on a radio frequency within the auditorium. So if you put your hearing aid onto the T setting, you'll pick up the film soundtrack on that frequency, and believe me, you will hear the difference. Actors' voices are so much clearer, and the background noise is as it was intended, in the background. But the guides don't. Even the main guide for London, the Time Out magazine, lists obscure little details like air conditioning and the size of the place. It doesn't actually tell you whether there's a loop system available or not. Guess I'm gonna have to do this the hard way. I'm ringing to ask if you have an audio loop system for the hearing impaired. You haven't? Okay, thank you very much. Excellent junk food, great loop system sound, but the film was, well, terrible. But what a nightmare it was to find a place with a loop system showing a film that I wanted to watch. I think it's a real problem for many deaf people. So, given that in the Greater London area alone, there are up to 1 million deaf people who are all, of course, potential cinema goers, See Here decided to root out the truth. We conducted our own major survey of Greater London to find out just how many cinemas are providing loop facilities for deaf movie fans. And what did we find? Not good news, I can tell you. Of all 90 cinemas in the area, less than a third had a loop facility. This includes modern, multi-screen cinemas in which only 1 or 2 screens had a loop system. Some places the loop was broken, employees had no idea what a loop system was, and at others there was no human being to speak to, so you couldn't even ask. Had provision for deaf people always been this bad?
Cinemas have always provided facilities for the hard of hearing. In the larger auditoria that were common in the 50s and 60s, the back 2 or 3 rows always had hearing facilities, were sort of earphones you picked up and put on. As people stopped going to the cinema, these fell into disuse.
So how big a revival have cinemas enjoyed recently?
There has been a huge revival in cinema going since 1985, which was stimulated in many ways by the opening of the first multiplex in November 1985. Since then, cinema owners and operators have invested over £1 billion in new estates, cinemas, rebuilds, refurbishments, and most importantly for you, John, is that they've started reintroducing the loops into cinemas.
This multi-screen cinema is owned by UCI, one of the largest cinema chains in the country. And I've come to ask if they have any plan to make the cinema a more accessible and therefore more enjoyable place for people like me.
At the moment, we're quite pleased to say that UCI has 75% coverage of hearing aid loops. At the moment, they're all the induction loop type. And it's our plans within the next 2 years that we will have 100% coverage. But we will be going on to a different system.
So what type of sound systems are available in cinemas for the hearing impaired?
The 2 systems which tend to be the most favourite are the induction loop system, which uses a copper strip buried under the carpet, and the person just walks into the auditorium, sets his earphone to T, and that's the end of it. There's no adjustments to make, and it's perfect. The downside is that where we have auditoriums close together, which is the way multiplexes are, you can get bleed over from one auditorium to the other very near the walls. And you can imagine the problems if someone's sitting next to the wall and they can hear the preceding film. The infrared system uses a little box like this, which you simply hang around your neck, and there is a small diode that picks up the infrared, and the signal is fed through the cable here to form a little mini loop, and that's picked up with your hearing aid in the normal way when set to T. So you have your own personal mini induction loop. So you can sit anywhere in the auditorium and it works.
And how do you let people know you've got these systems available?
We have a display on the outside of the building, and that will give the international recognised sign of the orange ear. And it's also a similar display on the inside of the building outside the auditoriums.
So do you think you're doing enough to let people know that these facilities are available?
It's difficult to say. Possibly not. I think we could possibly do a little bit more in our advertisements, possibly. But I don't know.
Our survey of the Greater London area found that very few cinemas had loops on offer. Why is that?
From our point of view, it is our intention that they will all be fitted in the very near future. But whether other circuits are concerned, it might be a cost factor, because it's one of those items that you never ever get your money back from. But we feel it's a moral obligation that we should have facilities for the hard of hearing in all our cinemas.
Good news, hey? Cinemas are now putting in loop facilities, but haven't we come back to our original problem? How on earth do we know which cinemas have these facilities? They're not listed or advertised anywhere, and for the London area, shouldn't these people be telling us?
Well, we have been listing the Artsline phone number. So that's the organisation where people can phone and find out whether they have particular facilities for the disabled. But hitherto, we've always thought there were two problems. One of the availability of comprehensive information, which, since their publication is now filled, and also the complexity of it. We thought there was too much information needed to give, and that's why we didn't do it.
So now that we know that there's a need for this kind of information, what is Time Out going to do about it?
Well, thanks. I think it's been very useful being approached by your programme, because now we've realised quite what the need for this information is, and having your survey, we have available information, and very soon we will be introducing that symbol with, the circle with the ear, so people better tell when they read the Time Out whether or not there's a loop line in the cinemas they want to go to.
More good news, eh? We'll now know which cinemas are worth going to. But what about subtitles and sign language? Well, that's another story. In fact, all this movie talk has made me hungry. Come on, let's go into the film. Let's be fair, a lot of it comes down to us as the customer. Are we demanding these facilities in our favourite cinemas? Because the vast majority of cinemas right across the country don't have these facilities. And if you want the cinema experience for the latest movie, but without the deafening sound effects, then you've got to keep reminding them you're here. Anyway, this business is all about putting bums on seats, and with nearly 8 million deaf people across the UK, they need us more than we need them.
This is Burwood Park School here in Surrey. It's an oral school for deaf children. My father, my brother and myself all went to this school, and today I've come back. I have many memories of my time here. It has a strong sense of deaf culture and history. When Burwood Park was established and opened its doors to new pupils back in 1955, it was one of around 100 deaf schools in the country. But over the years, education policy has changed and now deaf schools are disappearing. Last September, the shock announcement came in a letter from the governors that Burwood Park School would be closed down. Parents, teachers and the pupils were devastated. But why was it to close? And why at such short notice? There are a lot of rumours going around, but one thing that we do know is that there have been financial problems and the numbers of pupils have fallen. Everyone has their own views about the closure of the school. I'm here with Tim Darwin, the chair of the Parent Teachers Association. Tim, how did you first learn that the school was to close?
The first we heard of it was when my daughter telephoned home on the first day of term to say an announcement had been made by the head teacher that the school was going to close. We then had to ring other parents to find out what the situation was, and it was 2 days later we got a letter telling us the school was to close.
And what do you think is the reason behind the closure?
We are at a loss to understand why. We are told it's because there are too few pupils coming forward by the counties. But we weren't told of the difficulties earlier and find it unbelievable that the school should close so suddenly.
With hindsight, do you think that anything could have been done to prevent this?
We're sure it could have been prevented if only we'd been given earlier notification. A strategy could have been put in place. Parents could have become involved. And at least then we would have had a chance to save the future education here for the children.
Most deaf schools like Burwood Park, Maryhare, Derby and Margate are independent schools, which means they're not dependent on the local education authority for financial support. They're self-funding. Burwood Park relies on parents paying fees and local education authorities sending pupils there. Recently though, the number of pupils has fallen off. Why is that? This is Surrey, and yet Surrey County Council only have 4 pupils in the school. To find out why, I asked Paul Froster from their Special Needs Department.
The Education Act has placed an emphasis on education in mainstream, and it is true to say that over time we now place more pupils in mainstream school. There is a better understanding by mainstream teachers of the needs of hearing impaired pupils. And so the genuine need to use segregated provision has reduced. We have been in touch with a number of independent schools, both the hearing impaired and other disabilities, where they've perceived a drop-off in the number of referrals of saying to LEAs, could we provide in a different way or for a slightly different client group in order to attract referrals from you? Is there an area of disability that as an LEA you're not well geared to cope with? For example, hearing impaired youngsters who need signing support. We are currently not well geared for, and if children require that sort of support, often we have to look to independent provision. It may be the case that perhaps had Burwood talked to us, we might have suggested some sort of change like that.
The school's governors are responsible for the school's policies and financial management, but why did they decide to close the school? Couldn't they have found a way to keep it open? Margaret Clatt is the vice chair of the governors. Why did you decide to close the school?
About this time last year, we were looking at our finances and realised we were running into debt.
But why did you announce the decision so late? Couldn't you have notified people earlier?
The decision might have seemed that it was sudden, but in fact it wasn't. The governors have actually been meeting many times since last February, when we realised that an emergency package would have to be made, reliant on the numbers of intake this September if there was a chance for the school to remain open.
You mentioned financial difficulties, but did you raise those with the PTA?
I think the head teacher was meant to be doing that, and I believe when I have spoken to him that yes, the PTA were asked if they would help with the fundraising.
Do you think, looking back, that anything could have been done to save the school?
If I had 3 years back And something I have been working very hard for as a governor is I would like to have brought in signing into this school. I know politically within the hearing impaired world this is not always popular to have both systems of education, but I feel that's what held us back.
We'd hoped to speak with the head teacher. Unfortunately, he's been advised by his union not to discuss the matter. The Governor's decision to close the school has had a devastating effect on all those concerned, none more so than the pupils due to take their GCSE exams next summer. Katie Mowat is one of those who will be sitting her exams then. Her father is also an ex-pupil of the school. So Katie, will you be taking your exams next summer? You've both been pupils of Burwood Park, so you'll both have your own memories of your time here. Do you think that the closure will sour those memories?
But it could have been memories. Everything could have done, and I haven't. So I'm gonna done. But on my life, that